Episode 92, October 11 to 19, 1915. I Pleaded in Vain for Nurse Cavell by Brand Whitlock, U.S. Minister in Belgium, 1915. Read by James Lafrada. A famous American diplomat tells of the dramatic last appeals for mercy made to the Germans on behalf of that brave nurse, Edith Cavell, accused of smuggling British and Belgian soldiers across the frontier, who was to be shot less than 12 hours after she was condemned. As is known, these pleas were ignored, and a crime was committed which sent a wave of horror throughout the English-speaking peoples. Miss Cavell's last thoughts were embodied in the famous words, "Patriotism is not enough." Though lying on a sickbed, Mr. Whitlock left no stone unturned to save Nurse Cavell, and where the representative of the greatest neutral power failed, no one could have succeeded. At 9 o'clock that Monday evening, October 11, 1915, Maitre de Laval, a lawyer friend of the author, appeared suddenly at the door of my chamber. His face was deathly pallid. He said that he had just heard from the nurses who were keeping him informed that the judgment had been confirmed and that the sentence of death had been pronounced on Miss Cavell at 4:30 that afternoon, and that she was to be shot at 2 o'clock the next morning. It seemed impossible, especially the immediate execution of sentence. There had always been time at least to prepare and to present a plea for mercy. To condemn a woman in the evening, and then to hurry her out to be shot before another dawn? Preposterous. But no, Maitre de Laval was certain. That evening he had gone home and was writing at his table when, about 8 o'clock, two nurses were introduced. One was Miss Wilkinson, small and nervous, all in tears. The other, bigger and quieter. Miss Wilkinson said that she had just learned that the court had condemned Miss Cavell to death, that the judgment had been read to her in the cell of the prison at 4:30 that afternoon, and that the Germans were going to shoot her that night at 2 o'clock. Maitre de Laval told her that it was difficult to believe such news, since twice he had been told that the judgment had not been rendered and would not be rendered before the following day. But on her reiterating that she had this news from a source that was indisputable, de Laval left at once with her and her friend to the legation. And there he stood, pale and shaken. Even then I could not believe it. It was too preposterous. Surely a stay of execution would be granted. Already in the afternoon, in some premonition, Maitre de Laval had prepared for my signature an appeal for pardon to be submitted to the Governor-General and a letter of transmittal to present to the Baron von der Lancken. I asked Maitre de Laval to bring me these documents and signed them. Then, at the last minute, on a letter addressed to von der Lancken, head of the German political section in Brussels, I wrote these words. My dear Baron, I am too ill to present my request to you myself, but I appeal to your generosity to support it and save this unfortunate woman from her death. Have pity on her. Yours faithfully, Brand Whitlock. I told Maitre de Laval to send Joseph at once to hunt up Gibson, the Secretary of the U.S. Legation, to present the plea, and if possible to find the Marquis Villalobar, the Spanish minister, and to ask him to support it with the Baron von der Lancken. The Governor-General was in his chateau at Ch14, 10 miles away, playing bridge that evening. Maitre de Laval went. The nurses from Miss Cavell's school were waiting in a lower room. Other nurses came for news. They too had heard, but could not believe. Then the Reverend Maister Gahan, pastor of the English church, came. He had had a note from someone at St. Giles prison, a note written in German, saying simply, "Come at once, someone is about to die." He went away to the prison. His frail, delicate little wife remained at the legation, and there my wife and Miss Larner sat with those women all that long evening, trying to comfort, to reassure them. Outside, a cold rain was falling. Up in my chamber, I waited. A stay of execution would be granted, of course. They always were granted. There was not in our time anywhere a court, even a German court-martial, that would condemn a woman to death at 4:30 in the afternoon and hurry her out and shoot her before dawn. Midnight came, and Gibson with a dark face, and de Laval paler than ever. There was nothing to be done. De Laval had gone to Gibson, and together they went in search of the Marquis, whom they found at Baron Lambert's, a Belgian banker, where he had been dining. He and Baron Lambert and Monsieur Franqui, chairman of the Executive Committee on the National Committee, were over their coffee. The Marquis, Gibson, and de Laval went to the Rue de l'Embremont. The ministry was closed and dark. No one was there. They rang and rang again, and finally the concierge appeared. No one was there, he said. They insisted. The concierge at last found a German functionary, who came down, stood staring stupidly. Everyone was gone. His Excellency was at the theater. At what theater? He did not know. They urged him to go and find out. He disappeared inside, went up and down the stairs 2 or 3 times. Finally, he came out and said that they were at the Le Bois Sacré, the sacred wood. They explained that the presence of the Baron was urgent, and they asked the man to go for him. They turned over the motor to him, and he mounted on the box beside Eugenie. They reached the little variety theater there in Rue d'Arnberg. The German functionary went in and found the Baron, who said he would come when the piece was over. All this while, Villelabar, Gibson, and the Delval were in the salon at the ministry, the room of which I have spoken of so often as the yellow salon because of the satin upholstery of its Louis XVI furniture of white lacquer, that bright, almost laughing little salon, all done in the gayest, lightest tones, where so many little dramas were played. All 3 of them were deeply moved and very anxious, the eternal contrast, as Delaval said, between the sentiments and things. Lancken entered at last, very much surprised to find them. He was accompanied by Count Harrach and by the young Baron von Falkenhausen. "What is it, gentlemen?" he said. "Has something serious happened?" They told him why they were there, and Lancken, raising his hand, said, "Impossible." He had vaguely heard that afternoon of a condemnation for spying, but he did not know that it is anything to do with the case of Miss Cavell, and in any event it was impossible that they would put a woman to death that night. "Who has given you this information? For really, to come and disturb me at such an hour, you must have information from serious and trustworthy sources." Delaval replied, "Without doubt, I consider my information trustworthy, but I must refuse to tell you from whom I received it. Besides, what difference does it make? If the information is true, our presence at this hour is justified. If it is not true, I am ready to take the consequence of my mistake." The Baron showed irritation. "What?" he said. "It is because they say that you come and disturb me at such an hour, me and these gentlemen? No, no, gentlemen, this news cannot be true. Orders are never executed with such precipitation, especially when a woman is concerned. Come to see me tomorrow." He paused, then added, "Besides, how can you think that this hour I can obtain any information? The Governor-General must certainly be sleeping." Gibson, or one of them, suggested to him that a very simple way of finding out would be to telephone to the prison. "Quite right," he said. "I had not thought of that." He went out, was gone a few minutes, and came back embarrassed, so they said, even a little bit ashamed, for he said, "You are right, gentlemen. I have learned by telephone that Miss Cavell has been condemned, and that she will be shot tonight." Then Delaval drew out the letter that I had written to the Baron, and gave it to him, and he read it in an undertone, with a little sarcastic smile, so Delaval said. And when he had finished, he handed it back to Delaval and said, "But it is necessary to have a plea for mercy in the same time." "Here it is," said Delaval, and he gave him the document. Then they all sat down. I could see the scene, as it was described to me by Villelabar, by Gibson, by Delaval, in that pretty little salon Louis XVI that I knew so well. Lancken giving way to an outburst of feeling against that spy, as he called Miss Cavell, and Gibson and Delaval by turns pleading with him, the Marquis sitting by. It was not a question of spying, as they pointed out. It was a question of the life of a woman, a life that had been devoted to charity, to the service of others. She had nursed wounded soldiers. She had even nursed German wounded at the beginning of the war. And now she was accused of but one thing, of having helped British soldiers make their way towards Holland. She may have been imprudent. She may have acted against the laws of an occupying power, but she was not a spy. She was not even accused of being a spy. She had not been convicted of spying, and she did not merit the death of a spy. They sat there pleading, Gibson and Delaval, bringing forth all the arguments that would occur to men of sense and sensibility. Gibson called Lancken's attention to their failure to inform the legation of the sentence, of their failure to keep the word that had been given. He argued that the offense charged against Miss Cavell had long since been accomplished, that as she had been for some weeks in prison, a slight delay in carrying out the sentence could not endanger the German cause. He even pointed out the effect that such a deed as the summary execution of a sentence against a woman would have on public opinion, not only in Belgium, but in America and elsewhere. He even spoke of the possibility of reprisals. But it was all in vain. Baron von der Lancken explained to them that the military governor, that is, General von Saubersweg, was the supreme authority in matters of this sort, that the Governor-General himself had no authority to intervene in such cases, and that under the provisions of German martial law, it lay within the discretion of the military governor to accept or refuse an appeal for clemency. And then Villalobar suddenly cried out, "Oh, come now, it is a woman. You can't shoot a woman like that." The Baron paused, was evidently moved. "Gentlemen, it's past 11 o'clock. What can be done?" It was only von Saubersweg who could act, he said, and they urged the Baron to go see von Saubersweg. Finally, he consented. While he was gone, Villalobar, Gibson, and de Laval repeated to Harrach and von Falkenhausen all the arguments that might move them. Von Falkenhausen was young. He had been to Cambridge in England, and he was touched, though of course he was powerless. And de Laval said that when he gave signs of showing pity, Harrach cast a glance at him, so he said nothing more. And then Harrach said, "The life of one German soldier seems to us much more important than that of all these old English nurses." At last Lankin returned, and standing there announced, "I am exceedingly sorry, but the governor tells me that it is after due reflection that the execution was decided upon, and that he will not change his decision. Making use of his prerogative, he even refuses to receive the plea for mercy. Therefore, no one, not even the emperor, can do anything for you." With this, he handed my letter and the request for clemency to Gibson. There was a moment of silence in the yellow salon. Then Villalobar sprang up and, seizing Lankin by the shoulder, said to him in an energetic tone, "Baron, I insist on speaking to you." "It's useless," began Lankin. "I want to talk to you," the Marquis replied, giving categorical emphasis to the harsh imperative. The old Spanish pride had been mounting in the Marquis, and he literally dragged the tall von der Lancken into a little room nearby. Then voices were heard in sharp discussion, and even through the partition the voice of Villalobar. "It is idiotic, this thing you are going to do. You will have another Louvain." A few moments later they came back, Villalobar in silent rage, Lankin very red. And, as de Laval said, without another word, dumb in consternation, filled with despair, they came away. I heard the report, and they withdrew. A little while, and I heard the street door open. The women who had waited all that night went out into the rain. The rain had ceased, and the air was soft and warm the next morning. The sunlight shone through an autumn haze, but over the city the horror of the dreadful deed hung like a pall. Bills were early posted, and crowds huddled about them in a kind of stupefaction, reading the long and tragic list down to the line that closed with a piece of gratuitous brutality. The sentence against Balk and Cavell has already been carried out. Of the 26 others condemned, with Miss Cavell, 4, Philip Bach, an architect of Brussels, Louis Tuiles, a schoolteacher of Lille, Louis Savarat, a pharmacist of Brussels, and the Countess Jeanne de Belleville were sentenced to death. All day long, sad and solemn groups stood in the boulevards gazing at the grim poster. In one of the throngs, a dignified old judge said, "It was not the carrying out of a sentence. It was murder."
Goodbye, goodbye, when the day may be